Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I like to discuss the decision from the EU not to defer the implementation of post-Brexit rules of origin requirements after all, which will come as a massive blow to British-based car manufacturers, and yet another cautionary tale about choosing to believe con artists in the media instead of actual experts. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So one of the main arguments from Brexiteers was that the German car industry would come to our rescue. And when you pinned them down on the absolute lunacy of their plan to get all of the benefits of EU membership with none of the commitments, it must have sounded fairly implausible even to the most vulnerable Daily Express reader. Oh, but no, yeah, I could see where you're thinking, how can we get all the benefits without any responsibilities? But you see, what you're forgetting is that the German car industry will never let Merkel go ahead with what they say. You know, it would hurt them too, you see. Unfortunately, they made three fatal errors. First, Merkel was not the EU. Second, the single market is too valuable to compromise. And third, it would harm the EU's trade potential around the world to go chasing unicorns just to keep some wet and windy island off their north coast happy. The latest demonstration of this fallacy is the EU's decision not to grant an extension to rules of origin being applied properly come this following January. That's going to hurt electric car production in Britain especially hard, because there's a great deal of difficulty in sourcing the cells needed anywhere in Europe right now. We'll not be able to meet the requirements for tariff-free trade with Europe, therefore. As I keep saying, when Boris Johnson said we had a tariff-free deal with the EU, it was a half-truth at best. From this coming January, any electric cars that we try to export to the EU will face 10% tariffs, unless, of course, the EU change their mind before then. You know, and it's not the EU punishing us. This is World Trade Organization rules that the Brexiteers said we should go with. The reason why they haven't been applied as soon as we left Brexit is because we agreed with the EU a whole series of temporary easements, shall we say. You know, special little arrangements that weren't going to be for the long term, just to allow us to ease Brexit in phase by phase rather than have the full experience right in one day. And I cannot emphasize enough, tariffs are nothing to do with the EU. They are World Trade Organization mechanisms. The idea is to encourage countries to agree tariff reductions or indeed tariff-free trade with their most important markets. It's a way of encouraging people to do deals with each other. The EU single market is the ultimate expression of this, as trade is completely free within many of the wealthiest consumer markets in the world, with preferential trading terms with many of those around the world as well. We used to be part of it. We used to be a leading voice in it. No, not anymore. But the Brexiteers did get one thing right. The German car industry does get hurt by the full impact of Brexit. You know, the trade friction, because it does work in both directions. In fact, car manufacturers around Europe wanted the EU to grant the UK this extension on full rules of origin requirements coming in. You know, there's no way of a EU-based car manufacturer pressuring their political leaders to give us unicorn-level access to the single market. That was never going to happen. This idea that the German car industry would force the EU to give us preferential access to the single market, not a chance, because that would blow huge holes in their trade borders. But customs, a little different, because the EU is protecting the integrity of its single market and has customs controls, so EU manufacturers, including of cars, would prefer just a lighter touch on customs in their own interests. But the EU is fighting hard for its own green tech future as well, and it wants to focus on domestic production. That is not going to be helped by giving Britain special deals without any return. But this will cost EU car makers as well, should any Brexit supporters still in existence want some copium, because the process does work both ways. There will be imports applied to EU-produced electric cars coming into Britain. You know, we won't be able to export cars to the EU without tariffs, or electric cars, but neither will the EU into Britain. And the Financial Times reports that it will cost EU car manufacturers 4.3 billion euros. Now, that's a lot of anyone's money. But consider how it works in both directions as well. So EU car makers are going to find trade with Britain, not quite a full country in Europe, more difficult, to the tune of 4.3 billion euros. But they can trade everywhere else, including Northern Ireland, just as easily. Nothing changes this January for them, for any other market around the world or within Europe. But British car makers now face these tariffs everywhere in the EU, as well as with everything else to do with Brexit. The trade friction works both ways, yes, but it is worse for Britain than the EU. Because the EU loses one market, we lose dozens. Well, it's one single market, but dozens of countries worth of market. And it won't even boost our own domestic production as it will for the EU. Because the EU's lots of countries, it can build up the supply chains that it needs. We'll just end up importing more from Japan. Because Japan have tariff-free access with our trade deal. So once this change comes in place, cars produced in the EU, electric cars produced in the EU, will have tariffs in Britain. Japanese cars won't, neither will South Korean cars when it comes to it. That is why as soon as we signed the trade deal with Japan, a load of Japanese production promptly up sticks and buggered off back to Japan. Because it then became just as easy to sell into our market from Japan as it did from in Britain. Some are still hoping the EU will change its minds, and you can't rule it out. Of course they might. Until the decision is absolutely committed to, they might. But what's really needed is to break down trade friction, not keep deferring bits of it. This is a classic example of how Brexit is hurting everyone. Britain used to be part of a flourishing just-in-time supply chain in the car manufacturing industry, as well as other sectors, of course. Throwing a spanners in the works makes both Britain and the EU less competitive, to the benefit of Asian producers. In fact, it is interesting to note, although our Brexit Tory government seems to want to bash China quite a bit these days, their Brexit is actually helping them out. See, Chinese cars, we're going to import more from China as well, not just Japan. See, Chinese cars will be more competitively priced for the British market after this. They do pay tariffs. They pay the same tariffs that EU cars will have applied to them. But because production costs are lower in China, their cars will be cheaper overall after this move. So for the British consumer, car prices will go up because at the moment we're benefiting from effectively price reductions because the EU can export to us tariff-free. So for electric cars, I'll keep emphasising for electric cars, the tariffs will be applied. So the cost of those cars will go up because the biggest exporter, is about to have billions of pounds worth of tariffs slapped on them. We don't have the infrastructure in Britain to just boost domestic production to counteract this inflation. The only way we're even getting to be able to produce our own cells at some point in the future is because the government is pumping massive amounts of our money into it. So we're just going to buy more cars from China who have lower production costs, and Japan and South Korea who won't be paying the tariffs even from this January. British consumers lose because we'll have to pay more for the cars. British manufacturers lose because they face tariffs on their exports. EU manufacturers lose because they face tariffs on their exports. Countries at the other side of the world win because they aren't idiots who threw up a massive trade wall for no reason. So now we're actually left hoping the German car industry does come to our rescue. That is the weakness of Brexit. Strength is being able to steer your own destiny. Well, that's not what Brexit does. With Brexit, we are utterly reliant on others finding some reason to go easy on us. And if it happens, let's say it happens, Brexit is a machine. We told you that the German car industry would come to our rescue. It's like, so you're pleased that we're in such a weak position that we are utterly reliant on people in the EU finding some reason to go easy on us. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.